Guten Abend, good evening, Excellencies, and first of all, dear awardees, whom, as you just did, I would like to welcome warm-heartedly at the very beginning. Evgenia and Vladimir Kara-Murza, welcome. Dr. Gerald Rockenschaub, welcome. Mr. Alicia Schwitten and Maja Markanović-Riedl, representing the Austrian Autonomous Women's Shelters. A very warm welcome, of course, also to the laudatory speakers, Sir William Browder. Madam Ambassador Eva Nowotny, Vice President of the Bruno Kreisky Forum and member of the jury. And Dr. Beate Winkler, also member of the jury of today's award. Thank you. Welcome, and also welcome, dear human rights defenders, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue. It's a great pleasure and honor for the Bruno Kreisky Forum and myself, of course, to host once again the award ceremony for the Bruno Kreisky Honorary Prize for Human Rights. Let me therefore also welcome, of course, the organizers and the heart and minds of this award. The chairperson of the Bruno Kreisky Foundation for Human Rights, Dr. Eva Nowotny, welcome. Professor Oliver Radkolb, and all the other jury members. As the host of this very important event today, let me say it will be the 20th award given to human rights defenders and to those that, through their engagement and struggles, do serve the respect for and the implementation of human rights. Instead of referring to the obvious, namely the universality of human rights, and to the equally evident, namely the fact that human rights are neglected, breached, and violated everywhere on different levels and to various degrees, let me welcome you with a few words about this place, its former owner, and its spiritus rector, Bruno Kreisky. You will hear about the awardees, of course, by their laudators. So let me start with referring to Bruno Kreisky and how this award came into being. Allegedly, Bruno Kreisky refused to accept birthday presents, and friends and advisors thought about better things to invest into, namely into human rights. It seemed to be a humble gesture at that time, but as usual and all the time, as we have learned over the decades, financial support for the cause of human rights is desperately needed to assist the victims of human rights violations and to support their struggle within their home country and in the international arena, to support their lawyers, their campaigns, because these are campaigns beyond their individual causes and beyond their individual rescue, release, or well-being. Human rights defenders fight for the change of their state and societies at home and beyond. Money, greed, and corruption are, as we also can see, very crucial for those who establish regimes that threaten and violate human rights, who breach national rules and international law to stay in power and deprive the people of socioeconomic well-being, development, and the right to live. The honorary prize in Bruno Kreisky's name was first awarded in 1979, and among the long list of outstanding personalities and organizations that have received the Bruno Kreisky Award in all these years, let me just pick from the first group of awardees and build a bridge to this evening's awardees. Among the laureates in 1979 were a Palestinian, Dr. Issam Sartawi, and an Israeli, Arilova Eliav. The latter, Eliav, was born in 1921 in Moscow and moved to Palestine with his family in 1924. In the mid-80s, he helped realize the exchange of prisoners between Israel and Palestine. Sartawi was killed in 1983 by radical hardliners of his own people and political factions. Aliyev died in 2010. Looking at the state of the world today, this looks like a déjà vu, not only as far as the Middle East is concerned, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, now geographically extended far beyond to Lebanon and Iran, is still at the heart of the complexity of the region and the monstrosity of political agendas on all sides, and this has not changed, quite the contrary. As long as monstrosity prevails, there's little chance for peace. Probably Bruno Kreisky, a pertinent negotiator and diplomat, would have said there's always a possibility to talk and negotiate in order to reduce violence and limit escalations. It seems, however, that in our days, diplomacy has become hostage to militarization, and diplomacy has indeed been marginalized as an alternative to war. However, we seem not to listen to those politicians, wherever they are, and also in the regions mentioned, also at the homes some of our awardees are coming from, to the politicians and warlords who actually have made it clear for many years whom they are going to invade or wipe out, and we should listen more carefully, indeed. The before-mentioned exchange of prisoners, Aliyev was active in the 1990s, has always been part of conflicts or conflict resolution, but as we can see today, it is not only still in the agenda, but it has definitely become worse. Hundreds and thousands of incarcerated citizens and political prisoners around the globe have served authoritarian regimes as bargaining chips for their interests in breaching human rights and their willingness to break people's struggle for justice, democracy, and a more decent life. People fighting for the development and their well-being of their societies have been taken hostage by the regimes to be traded off when time comes. Releasing prisoners to get some international recognition, international agreements and loans, etc. This seems to be a modern rationale of hijacking human beings for undemocratic and cruel objectives. Trading prisoners for an authoritarian or dictatorial regime's own purpose make us suspicious. However, what else than lucky and happy could we be this evening about those who have been swapped and have been released and that are alive among us that can and will continue their struggle? For many other prisoners, however, the swap came unfortunately too late. So thank you, Evgenia and Vladimir, to be here with us today. Bruno Kreisky was a social democrat who also gave emphasis to civil society organizations that were active in alleviating poverty and that helped satisfying social, health, and other urgent needs. Human rights as part of social, economic, and social security rights was very dear to him. So to recognize the engagement of individuals and multilateral organizations in humanitarian aid and healthcare was important for the jury in all these years. And so we warm-heartedly thank Dr. Gerald Rockenschaub for his extraordinary work within the WHO, but also beyond. Thank you. Before you will hear about this by Dr. Nowotny and the laudation speakers in detail, let me instead build another bridge from today to 1979, when Austrian Hildegard Gossmeier was awarded the Bruno Kreisky Honorary Award for Human Rights. She was a peace activist in the Cold War times, fostering people-to-people contacts over the Iron Curtain between Austrians and people in Eastern Europe before extending her activities into more than 40 countries. As the first woman, she received the Bruno Kreisky Prize because of her pacifist engagement in the East-West dialogue. Let us bear in mind that this dialogue is needed today, maybe more than ever. Women have always been at the forefront of human rights struggles because they are more often victims in their immediate, closest environment, namely in their marriages and families and neighborhood. And this has not changed until today, to the contrary, as we can see, of the rising number of femicides also in our country. The same year, this award was created in 1979. Kreisky nominated Johanna Donal as Austria's first state secretary for women's affairs. She later became Austria's first minister for women's affairs. So this was to connect today's award ceremony to the former Austrian foreign minister and federal chancellor Bruno Kreisky. And this forum a think tank in his legacy and for the future promotion of the above-mentioned efforts related to mediation, conflict resolution, and peace, to women's rights, human rights, justice, and equal opportunities. One of his most famous quotes in an angry instruction to a journalist, "Learn about history," he said, "Let me say that in times of increasing disinformation, fake news, and the discreditation of facts, in times where opinions are more important than facts, this command, learn history and learn from history, gets even more important. So let's learn about and from history." And this brings me to my last point. Many of today's prize winners honor Bruno Kreisky's legacies, also in relation to women's rights. So therefore, as of today, we also the award is also handed over to the Austrian autonomous women's shelters, reflecting the fight for women's security, women's rights, and the fight to support victims of domestic and other forms of violence. So let me finalize by saying that what history has taught us is certainly the fact that getting together and forming communities of human rights defenders is needed in order to support their causes and our cause, namely to defend and strengthen human rights. No social media, nothing else, can replace the fact that human rights defenders need to get together. Their crowd needs to become stronger and more visible. Behind every awardee of this evening, and in general, be it from Russia or Austria, as of today, stands a huge crowd, often not seen and unheard. As much as we should not forget about the good guys in prison, we should have a closer look at the many people that are not too loud, a lesson we might also learn after this weekend's elections. I thank you, therefore, for being here today with us and to show the awardees your lively and your real support as human rights defenders. Thank you and congratulations again to all of you that you will be praised and awarding this evening. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear honored recipients of the Bruno Kreisky Prize today, perhaps for those of you, of our friends from abroad, I may introduce you a bit to this house. This house has been the private home of Bruno Kreisky, and as he was, of course, a homo politicus, there was no real clear distinction between his private life and his political life. So in this house, and especially there in this room next to this, many talks and many interventions and many meetings have taken place about and in the context of the human rights activities of Bruno Kreisky. So it is a bit kind of the spirit of this house that is also a spirit for today. It has been said already that this award has been started in 1976 at the 60th birthday of Bruno Kreisky. And since then, it has been awarded to a great number of really very prominent, excellent personalities. And it's also interesting to see that kind of the issues that are a part of this of the work of this Bruno Kreisky Forum and of our group have changed to a certain extent. So at the beginning, of course, it was dominated by the crimes of dictatorial regimes in Central and South America, the oppression of the Soviet bloc, apartheid system in Southern Africa, and of course the general North-South conflict. And Bruno Kreisky had been intensely involved with the Middle East conflict already in the 1960s through the founding of Vienna Institute of Development Studies, and I'm very glad that former Minister Jankovic, who was the chair of this institute, is among us.
Excuse me, sir. Would you please adjust the microphone?
Yes. So, can you hear me now? It's better. Thank you for telling me. And that, of course, we have this tradition of the contacts with the Near East, with Egypt, with Israel, is something that is also very close to this house. This year, the independent jury and the Board of Trustees of the Bruno Kreisky Foundation for Services to Human Rights unanimously decided to award the International Bruno Kreisky Human Rights Prize to Evgenia Kara-Murza and to her husband Vladimir Kara-Murza. And we are very glad that you are here. And there will, later on, of course, there will be a laudatio given, especially on your behalf. We have further honors with the Bruno Kreisky Human Rights Award. We are awarded to the dedicated physician and tireless health diplomat of the WHO, Dr. Gerald Rockenschaub, who is here with us, and the Association of Autonomous Austrian Women's Shelters for its permanent and tireless commitment to the prevention of violence against women and their children. And we're also very glad that you can be with us. And there will be specific laudationes for each of you then after my short introduction. It has been already mentioned that we have a very long and prominent list of prize winners. Among them, for instance, Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, lawyer Wolfgang Kalik, in special recognition for his legal work within the framework of the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, and Professor Manfred Nowak for his lasting life's work as a tireless human rights defender within the framework of the United Nations, and in Austria as a human rights teacher at a very well known and also well beloved teacher at the University of Vienna. My special thanks go to the Bruno Kreisky Forum and its Secretary General, Mrs. Sabine Kroissenbrunner, who just gave her speech, Mrs. Sonja Kote, Mrs. Jana Jodelbauer, as well as the honorary board members of the Kreisky Human Rights Foundation, Maria Messen and Oliver Radkolb. And in fact, I may add that Oliver is really at the center of our work for the human rights issues, and I want to thank you especially very much for your unique contributions. And I'm also glad that we have the former Secretary General of the Kreisky Forum, Mrs. Gertrud Anna Borea-Dolmo, with us. On behalf of the trustees of the Bruno Kreisky Foundations for Services to Human Rights, I would like to congratulate you, dear awardees, and thank you for accepting this award. It's a great honor for us, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
I am here tonight in the role of the moderator who will walk you through this evening, and I have the honor to introduce Sir William Browder as the laudatory speaker for Vladimir and Evgenia Kara-Murza. Bill Browder is the chairperson for the Magnitsky justice campaign, which he founded many years ago when his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was murdered by the Putin regime. And Sir William decided to fight against the murderers and the regime behind them. Thank you very much, Bill, that you are here.
Thank you, Gertrude, for inviting me back. I was here 11 years ago giving a talk at the Bruno Kreisky Forum to talk about my campaign for justice for Sergei Magnitsky, and it's nice to be back, and particularly nice to be back for this particular occasion and event, which I will, you'll see when you hear my words why it's such a glorious night tonight. I'm sorry that I'm speaking English. Probably 95% of the people here speak German. I'm actually Austrian, although I don't speak German. My mother was from Vienna. She was a Holocaust refugee, and I became Austrian in 2020, so I share that with you here, so I'm glad to be back home. Basically, Vladimir, Kara-Murza, and I, we met in 2012 at the Canadian Parliament. It was 3 years after the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. Sergei was murdered for uncovering a Russian government corruption scheme that he exposed and testified against the officials involved. The scheme was a very profitable scheme for the perpetrators. They got $230 million. He exposed it, and for that he was arrested, tortured for 358 days, and killed in detention in Russia. And I embarked on a campaign to get justice for him. And as I was on this campaign to get justice, one of the ideas that emerged was a piece of legislation to freeze the assets and ban the travel of the people who commit these types of crimes in Russia. And this legislation, in order to get the legislation passed, I needed to go to various parliaments around the world. And I showed up at the Canadian Parliament to discuss the virtues of the Magnitsky Act. And this young man, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was just barely 30, showed up as well. And Vladimir, he comes from the Russian opposition. He was opposed to Putin. He was a journalist by training and also a historian. He showed up and testified in front of the Canadian Parliament after I did, and I was just blown over by his personal charisma, his passion, and his general effectiveness. And by the way, we were in Canada. In there, you speak English and French, and he spoke half his testimony in English and half his testimony in French with just perfect precision. And I realized that he and I had a common cause, and so for all future testimonies at all different parliaments around the world, he and I went together. And we've traveled the world everywhere. We went to Brussels, we went to Paris, we went to Sweden, we went to Norway, we went to London, we went to Washington and the Netherlands and Australia, everywhere. And over the course of this campaign, we achieved something which has probably never been achieved before, which is that we were able to get 35 countries to pass the Magnitsky Act. Most importantly, the United States, but following that, Canada, the United Kingdom, the European Union, various other places. Now it's really a remarkable piece of legislation. Remarkable for the victims, terrible for the perpetrators. The people who do these crimes, like the murder of Sergei Magnitsky, love to do these crimes, get their money, and then keep their money safely abroad. And all of a sudden, Vladimir and I shut down that loophole. And so they went after both of us. They started chasing me around the world with Interpol arrest warrants, with extradition requests, death threats, etc. And I avoided it. Vladimir went back to Russia. He went back to Russia, and in 2015, in the summer of 2015, he was poisoned. He was poisoned with what we believe to be Novichok, which is the same thing they used in Salisbury and against Alexei Navalny. And he went into a coma, multiple organ failure, and we had no idea if he was going to live or die, and it seemed most likely he was going to die. The doctors gave him a 5% chance of living. It was during that crisis that I met Evgenia Kara-Murza, Vladimir's wife, who's sitting here today as well. And in that time, in the 6 weeks when he was in hospital and coma and fighting for his life, Evgenia and I became close. We became allies, we became friends. And I got to see, under the most extreme pressure that I think anyone could be under, which is to be the spouse of somebody who's fighting for their life from an unknown poison, she had the most incredible equilibrium and purpose in saving her husband, and not flapping about, not being emotional, being purposeful in saving her husband, and he was saved. She saved him, the doctors saved him, and he survived. I begged him not to go back to Russia ever again after that, but Vladimir is so committed to his country that in 2017 he was back in Moscow and they poisoned him again. Again, he was treated by the same doctors. He survived again, remarkably. And when the war started, when Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, Vladimir and I and Evgenia were all in London together just before or just right after the invasion. And we were having dinner. And I was just about to publish my second book, and I wanted to make sure Vladimir would be able to come to the book launch because I wanted him to speak about it, because I had written about this whole poisoning story in my book, and I thought he would be really an ideal speaker. And he said, yes, I would be honored to come to your book launch, but I'm going to Moscow first. And I said, Vladimir, if you go to Moscow, at worst, they will kill you. They'll probably kill you. And at best, they will put you in jail. And I said, you can't go. It would be you just can't do that. And he said, I have to go. How can I protest the war, stand up against Putin, ask other people to stand up against Putin if I don't go back? And he was unpersuadable. And so he did go back. He went back in March of 2022. He went on to CNN and MSNBC and called Putin a war criminal and a murderer from Moscow. And he was subsequently arrested. He was charged with a number of charges that began escalating and escalating until he was charged with high treason. The judge that tried his case was the same judge who was responsible for Sergei Magnitsky and who was sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. And that judge sentenced Vladimir to 25 years in prison. It was the longest sentence of any political prisoner in Russia. Vladimir was sent off to Siberia, and again, Evgenia and I reconvened to try to figure out how to get Vladimir out. Vladimir was suffering not just from being in prison, but from the after effects of the poison. And so we started to campaign. And in this campaign, I discovered something remarkable, which is that Evgenia I was talking about how charismatic and what an amazing politician Vladimir was when I first met him. Evgenia was better than Vladimir. Unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. She has no training in any of this, but again, from passion, intellect, and a sense of purpose, she went in front of all these lawmakers and all these government officials everywhere and told the story and persuaded everyone to get on side. And we went to Berlin, we went to Brussels, we went to Ottawa, we went to Washington, we went to London, and Evgenia did her thing. And the other thing which was remarkable in this campaign is I've done a lot of campaigning over the course of my life. I've never had to campaign for somebody as easy to campaign for as Vladimir. He was the most beloved person I've ever had the opportunity to campaign for. Everybody that I talked to and told this story, they all either knew him or knew of him, and there was no black marks against him. He was only sort of an inspired person that everybody wanted to help. And as the process went on and on and on, it was very frustrating, very difficult. It looked hopeless. And as time went on, it became clear that Vladimir was never going to survive anywhere near 25 years in prison. They put him in solitary confinement. He was stuck in a cell, 4x6 cell, 23 hours a day. He was suffering from the after effects of the poison. He had something called polyneuropathy. And he was going to die if we didn't get him out. And as time went on, it became more and more desperate, more and more difficult. And it was really difficult for me being with Evgenia because I could see the pain that she was suffering every day, and she never gave herself a break at any point. Not for 2.5 years, she didn't give herself a break at any point. But then something remarkable happened. On August 1st this year, Vladimir was on the plane with 15 others that landed in Ankara with a prisoner swap for 10 Russian criminals. We had succeeded in getting Vladimir out. It really is an unbelievable thing to have gotten Vladimir out. I thought for sure that Vladimir was going to die in prison. And so when we're sitting here today celebrating Vladimir and Evgenia, it really is a celebration. It's a celebration of life. He really would have died if he hadn't been on that plane. And so I can say that, I mean, it really is something that just, when I got the news that he was on the tarmac in Ankara, I literally broke down and cried from relief and happiness that Vladimir was going to survive and live another day. So here we are. It's also a big gift to me because after our dinner that night, when I was trying to persuade him to not go to Russia, my parting words is, if you go back and you get arrested, I'm going to have to spend the next 10 years of my life trying to get you out of prison. He's now been released after 2.5 years, so he's given me 7.5 years of my life back. But there's something really important about the campaign that we went on, that Vladimir and I did on the Magnitsky, which I want to share with you, which is that I'm not sure exactly why, but many people who have been involved in this campaign have gone on to achieve great things. So when we first started it in Canada, we had a woman named Chrystia Freeland, who I had known in Moscow as a journalist. She was the bureau chief of the Financial Times, and she had gone on. She's Canadian, and she went back to Canada and became a backbench member of the Canadian Parliament. And she was helping us with this campaign. That she was committed to the Magnitsky Act, and somehow, miraculously, she became the Foreign Minister of Canada and passed the Magnitsky Act. We then have a guy from the UK who was a backbench member of Parliament named Dominic Raab, who was the main promoter on the backbench of the Magnitsky Act. He went on to become the Foreign Secretary of the UK and passed the Magnitsky Act. We have a friend from the Czech Republic. His name is Jan Lipavsky, again, backbench of the smallest political party. He became the foreign minister of the Czech Republic, and he passed the Magnitsky Act. So Vladimir, who started out as a 30-year-old guy with great potential, has gone on to achieve that potential. And he did something which almost nobody would do, which is he was ready to sacrifice his freedom and potentially his life for his country, for his patriotism, to make Russia a better place. In the last few weeks, he's been to meet the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, President of the United States, Prime Minister of Britain, President of Finland, today the President of Austria. And I think this is just a small taste of what's going to happen with Vladimir. I think at this point, Vladimir is the genuine and undisputed leader of the Russian opposition. And if Russia ever becomes a free and democratic country, Vladimir will be the leader of Russia. And it gives me great pleasure to congratulate Vladimir and to congratulate Evgenia for the Bruno Kreisky Prize. Congratulations.
Bill, before I say anything else, thank you so much for your warm and your kind words, and I just want to say that it's been an honor and a privilege of my lifetime to work alongside you to get some accountability for these crooks and these human rights abuses, and I look forward to taking this campaign to many more countries around the world.
Bill, Sir William, Bill, dear friend, thank you so very much for your kind words. I could not have hoped for a better ally and a better fellow warrior in all of this. And I will never forget how, after one interview that we did together, someone referred to us as a club and a scalpel. You being the club, me being the scalpel. I think we made a great team, and I'm truly, truly thankful for that.
Secretary General Kroissenbrunner, Chairman Nowotny, Executive Director Harthold, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I remember vividly that day back in April when my lawyer came to see me on his weekly visit at the special regime prison number 7 in Omsk and told me that Evgenia and I have been awarded the Bruno Kreisky Prize for Human Rights. I felt deeply humbled, of course, but also totally surreal, sitting and being locked in that small room behind a glass that separated me from my lawyer. And that news sounded like something from a different planet, something like out of some kind of a parallel reality. And of course, I could never, ever imagine that I'll be able to receive this award in person. Tonight, I'm feeling surreal as well, but in a much better way. That prison exchange in August that saved 16 people, 16 human lives from the hell of Vladimir Putin's modern-day gulag was a miracle. That's the only way I can describe it, but it was in many ways a human-made miracle that was made possible by so many good people in democratic nations who never stop advocating, speaking, shouting about all those political prisoners locked up in Vladimir Putin's Russia. And it is thanks to all of them, to all of you, that I'm standing here in this beautiful city rather than still sitting in that 4 by 5 meter prison cell in solitary confinement in Siberia. The last time an international exchange of this kind freed a Russian political prisoner was almost 4 decades ago in 1986, when Professor Yuri Orlov, a renowned physicist and founding chairman of the Moscow-Helsinki group, was sent from Siberia to New York City. That exchange was also the result of relentless efforts by world statesmen, among them Bruno Kreisky, who at one point personally reached out to Soviet leader Yuri Andropov on Orlov's behalf. It's very heartening to know that in our age, when cynicism and realpolitik too often seem so dominant, human rights still have a place in international affairs, a legacy left to us by the generation of Bruno Kreisky and by the Helsinki Final Act that bears his signature.
Vladimir and I are beyond honored to be awarded the Bruno Kreisky Human Rights Prize. And we view it first and foremost as your recognition of all our fellow Russian citizens who had the courage to stand up to Putin and call out his war of aggression, his murderous aggression against Ukraine, in full knowledge of what the price of that stand would be. According to self-admittedly incomplete counts by human rights groups, today's Russia holds at least 1,300 political prisoners, more than the whole of the Soviet Union in its later days. The number is growing constantly. This coming week alone, 224 people will be tried in courtrooms across the country in politically motivated cases. And the fastest growing category on the political prisoners list are people who have protested against the war in Ukraine. These protests have taken different forms. In the case of Alexei Gorinov, a Moscow municipal councillor, it was calling for a minute of silence at his council meeting for Ukrainian children killed by Russian bombs. The price was 7 years in prison. In the case of Maria Ponomarenko, a Siberian journalist, it was reporting honestly on the Russian airstrike on the theater in Mariupol that led to hundreds of civilians' deaths. The price was 6 years in prison. In the case of Dmitry Ivanov, a talented mathematician who was arrested on the day of his final exam at Moscow State University before he could graduate, he was posting on social media about war crimes committed by Russian forces in Bucha and elsewhere in Ukraine. The price was 8.5 years in prison. And the list goes on. Too many names that would be possible to mention. We want to dedicate the prize to all of Russia's political prisoners. And the monetary part in its entirety will go to the 30th of October Foundation that was set up while Vladimir was still in prison and that provides financial help to families of political prisoners in Russia, especially families with young children, so that people whose loved ones have been taken away by the authorities, by the government, for the only quote-unquote crime of expressing opinions that differ from those of the government, so that these people at least don't have to think about how they're gonna put food on their table.
And we are especially grateful for the wider message sent by the jury's decision, because Vladimir Putin wants the whole world to think that he is Russia. He wants the whole world to think that all Russians support his regime, that all Russians back his war. But events like this one tonight are sending a strong message of solidarity to those Russians who believe in a different, more hopeful, more peaceful, more democratic future for our country. And it is my hope that when people in the free world today think and speak about Russia, they will remember not only the aggressors and the war criminals who are sitting in the Kremlin, but also those who are standing up to them, because we are Russians too. I know that one day our vision of Russia will prevail. We want to thank from the bottom of our hearts. We want to thank you, all of you, from the bottom of our hearts for standing with those who are working to bring that day a little closer. Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you. We are moving to the next prize, and I would like to invite Dr. Eva Nowotny, former ambassador, to the podium to give the laudatory speech for Gerald Rockenschaub. Thank you.
I have to adjust the microphone again. I felt very honored and privileged to have been asked to give the laudation for our honoree, Gerald Rockenschaub, and I will gladly do so. But before, I would like to share with you a few remarks of a rather general nature. As Vice President of the Bruno Kreisky Forum of International Dialog, I'm very pleased that for the 20th time we award today the Bruno Kreisky Prize for achievements in the field of human rights. And I'm very pleased not only because in doing so we honor life and work of this great politician for whom upholding and defending human rights was an integral part of his politics and his political work. But Mr. Kara-Murza and Mrs. Kara-Murza just said, brought back the important role that Bruno Kreisky played in the implementation of the Helsinki Acts and in the process that led afterwards finally to the year 1989 and the breach of the Berlin Wall and the fall down of communism. So integral defense for human rights and work for human rights was an integral part of Bruno Kreisky's political life. I'm convinced also that this is the second reason I'm particularly pleased, that in this day and age it is extremely important, yeah, essential, to constantly uphold the relevance of human rights, to pull the work for human rights into the limelight and make it visible, give it a visibility, and to underline our commitment to it. The adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which then became the basis for the whole comprehensive edifice of international human rights legislation, is one of the great success stories of the United Nations. And rightly so, this is also recognized and mantra-like repeated in many political statements. At the same time, however, we have to be aware, and this is a sobering realization, that in the political climate of today, it would be near impossible to repeat this exercise. Since its inception, the Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights discourse, which developed on the basis, was often targeted of criticism. Criticism by voices who saw the human rights discourse only against the backdrop of a colonial past and a post-colonial present. Now, however, the attack is more fundamental. On the forefront of the critique on human rights, which more and more turns into a political confrontation with the West, we see China, and President Xi said quite openly that the unity and stability of China are more important than human rights. Many countries, especially in the so-called global south, but not only, it echoes also in many European countries, are rallying behind such a thought. Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines the right to a healthy life and to medical care. And this brings me now closer to our subject matter, because it is the World Health Organization which became the center of Dr. Rockenschaub's professional life. When one thinks of the United Nations, it is primarily the Security Council, perhaps also the General Assembly, which come to mind. But for a large part of the people of this world, there is a different picture. It is the picture of the United Nations truck, which brings food or water, and the doctor of the World Health Organization who brings medicine and vaccination. Of this organization, which by some politicians in this country is accused of repairing a global takeover and a world government, and this altogether with about 9,000 people of staff. Gerald studied medicine at the University of Graz and joined the WHO, World Health Organization, in 2004, and very quickly became Director for Health Emergencies in the European region, thus being responsible for humanitarian aid and assistance in emergency situations. But Gerald Rockenschaub was never one for the quiet life in the European hotbed of seething rest. In 2014, he became head of the office of the World Health Organization in the occupied Palestinian territories, i.e. the West Bank and Gaza, a position which he held till 2021. Although the larger Middle East was and remains central to Gerald Rockenschaub's professional life, it deserves mention that he was also involved in other trouble spots of this world, such, for instance, Ethiopia and, or Albania, and I've been told that he's on the brink of leaving us again for Ukraine to do some work there. Providing and organizing basic health care, standards of hygiene, avoiding the outbreak of epidemics, and protecting the most vulnerable groups of the civilian population in an area characterized by military intervention, turmoil, and upheaval is a task of monumental dimension. The successful conduct of the polio vaccination, for instance, of thousands of children in Gaza serves as a good example. But we should bear in mind that it is not only the present catastrophic situation, but that this was the political reality in West Bank and Gaza for decades. Doing exemplary work there, Gerald Rockenschaub formed personal relationships which persist still today and gain insights into the daily reality as well as the background and the roots of this terrible conflict. The extent to which his political knowledge and his personal commitment is appreciated led to this nomination as WHO expert and consultant in the task force of Sigrid Kaag, who on the basis of Security Council Resolution 2720 was mandated with humanitarian relief as a humanitarian relief and destruction coordinator, and has just been prolonged for another 6 months. It is my pleasure and my privilege to present to Gerald Rockenschaub the Bruno Kreisky Prize for achievements in the field of human rights, and I congratulate him most warmly.
I'm actually a little challenged now because I obviously did also prepare some notes, but honestly they are in German, so perhaps we can find a compromise. And as Bill Browder said in the beginning, perhaps I can do half of it in German and half of it in English. I would definitely like to start with saying a few thank yous, obviously to the Bruno Kreisky Forum. I take this prize with great humility, and I really would like to dedicate it to the human and humanitarian workers in the Palestinian context. This is day 364 of this conflict, and I think we saw a number of red lines being crossed there, violating human rights law, humanitarian law, and a number of other red lines that have been crossed there. Thanks also to Eva for the really nice words, and thanks to Gerald Rockenschaub also for her mentorship, I should say. Let me also congratulate Evgenia and Vladimir Kara-Murza. My deepest respect for your courage and for your principled stance on human rights in the Russian Federation. I've been multiple times in Ukraine since the war began on 24th of February 2022, and I saw firsthand the suffering and destruction of civilian infrastructure that the Putin regime is causing there. Herzliche Gratulation auch an den Verein Autonome Österreichische Frauenhäuser. Ich glaube, diese Anerkennung für ihre sehr wichtige Arbeit ist wirklich ein sehr, sehr wichtiges Zeichen. I would like to dedicate this prize and think about a WHO colleague whom unfortunately we lost in Gaza, Dima Al-Hajj, a 29-year-old colleague whom we recruited for her rehabilitation medical program in Gaza, and who was following an evacuation order, moving with her family to Rafah after the Israeli army had issued this evacuation order. Unfortunately, the house she evacuated to presumable safety was hit by a bomb, and she was killed, her 5-month-old child. Her husband was killed together with a number of relatives. She's only one of the, meanwhile, more than 300 humanitarian workers who lost their life, 302 now. 224 are members of the United Nations, 220 from UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, the agency that is taking care of Palestine refugees. We have on the brink of collapse the health system in Gaza. We have the first polio case, Kinderlähmung, that we are seeing there after Gaza has been for 25 years polio-free, which is a significant indication that, the hygiene system is collapsing, the sewage system isn't working anymore. I would also like, obviously, to refer to the 7th of October, where, Israel and I think our Jewish friends have suffered a collective trauma. I think a security illusion burst on that day, because I think they have been sold the illusion that the Palestinian conflict, or the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, could be managed by simply ignoring that conflict. And obviously, we need to condemn any kind of anti-Semitism, and we need to strongly condemn the cruelties which happened on the 7th of October, very formally and firmly. But I think they cannot be used as an argument to allow the Israeli army to continue with attacking civilians, innocent civilians in Gaza. 41,000 deaths are too strong an argument that there is a desperate need for a vision of a ceasefire, a peace, and the need for a political solution. And unfortunately, I don't see that anywhere at the moment due to the lack of political will on probably both sides of these conflicts. I would just like to say, well, one simmer of hope is actually the successful polio vaccination campaign. We at least saw some humanitarian pauses that allowed this campaign to be conducted successfully, not quite the way that we wanted to have it initially, because we were basically trying to negotiate a ceasefire, but eventually we could agree with the Israeli army on zoning and having basically ceasefires in place to at least allow that to proceed and to be successful. There is now a second round planned to start mid of October. I would, at the end, first of all, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my family, my wife and my daughter, who probably, had, to stack back some of their personal needs occasionally. I also would like, in light of the dire situation in Gaza and in the Palestinian territories, dedicate the award money to some Palestinian institutions. I would like to dedicate it to the Clark Education Foundation. John Clark, who is the leader of the Middle East Quartet, he has created this foundation in memory of his wife, who passed away while he was working there in Palestine for many, many years now. And they award scholarships for Palestine refugee females. And I would like the other part to be supporting the Palestinian medical relief committees of Mustafa Barghouti, who runs primary care clinics in the West Bank and in Gaza. Ich darf am Schluss vielleicht auf Deutsch, with your permission, noch Anleihe bei meiner Kollegin Sigrid Karg nehmen, die als UN-Koordinatorin für humanitäre Hilfe und Wiederaufbau jetzt ihr Sicherheitsratsmandat verlängert bekommen hat und mit der ich 6 Monate jetzt zusammenarbeiten konnte. Bei einem ihrer Gaza-Besuche zuletzt hat ihr ein 8-jähriges Mädchen einen simplen Zettel in die Hand gedrückt. Und ich möchte aus diesem Zettel diese simple Botschaft kurz zitieren. Mein Name ist Fatima Al-Masri, ich bin 8 Jahre alt. Ich bin aus Gaza. Ich liebe mein Land und meine Freunde. Ich lebe in einem Lager. Ich würde gerne in einem richtigen Zuhause wohnen, in einem Haus, wie alle anderen Kinder auch. Ich denke, wir sind das allen Kindern, besonders denen in Gaza, schuldig. Vielen Dank.
Nun freue ich mich, Frau Dr. Beate Winkler auf die Bühne zu bitten. Beate Winkler is former director of the European Human Rights and Basic Rights Council agency, which was based in Vienna. And since she stepped back from this position, she is an artist and a human rights defender. Thank you very much for the laudatory speech for the women's shelters. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Now we are going to the Austrian level. Sehr geehrte Vertreter des Bruno Kreisky Forums, verehrte Preisträgerinnen und Preisträger, liebe Mitstreiter, Mitstreiterinnen der Jury und sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Nach einem heißen Sommer und Urlaub treffen wir uns heute Abend wieder an diesem so besonderen Ort. Für unsere Reisen haben wir die Koffer ein- und ausgepackt, oft beladen mit heiteren Erinnerungen und neuer Lebensenergie. Mit was aber sind die Koffer ausgefüllt, wenn Frauen in Notsituationen in österreichische Frauenhäuser flüchten? Ich zitiere: Sie sind gefüllt mit Angst, Verletzung, Demütigung, Scham, Drohungen, auch Angst, ermordet zu werden. Schnell und oft heimlich, in einem unbeobachteten Moment, mussten sie ihre wichtigsten Habseligkeiten zusammenpacken. Das Fotoalbum, die Zeugnisse ihrer Kinder und deren Lieblingskuscheltiere, Dokumente und wichtige Telefonnummern, das Nötigste an Gewand. Die Frauen haben beschlossen, diesen Weg auf sich zu nehmen, weil sie nicht mehr eingesperrt, geschlagen, gedemütigt, zerstört oder sogar ermordet werden wollen. Sie flüchten aus ihrem eigenen Zuhause vor ihrem Ehemann, Partner, vor dem Vater ihrer Kinder. Sie fürchten um ihr Leben. Zusammen mit ihren Kindern, das wird sehr oft vergessen, werden sie aufgenommen in Frauenhäusern. Sie finden Beratung, wie es in ihrem Leben weitergehen kann, Unterstützung, um finanziell überleben und leben zu können, Möglichkeiten für Ausbildung und Beruf, vor allem aber Sicherheit, Geborgenheit, Ruhe, Gespräche und Respekt. 1200 Personen waren es 2023, die dort ein neues Leben fanden. Die Hälfte davon waren Frauen, die andere Hälfte Buben und Mädchen. Nach einiger Zeit, in der Regel nach 3 bis 6 Monaten, verlassen Frauen nun ihre Kinder die Frauenhäuser mit einem anderen Inhalt in ihrem Gepäck. In ihrem Koffer sind jetzt Zukunft, Hoffnung, Stärke, Selbstvertrauen, Zuversicht und Mut. Diese Arbeit des Vereins Autonome Österreichische Frauenhäuser mit ihrem ganzen Team und die Frauen, die in ihnen leben und den Mut gehabt haben, ihr Leben zu ändern, würdigen wir heute. Ihre Entscheidung und ihr Engagement geben Familien, Frauen, Mädchen und Buben neue Zukunftsperspektiven. Es ist ein ganzes System, das viele Frauen mit beispielhaftem Einsatz über Jahrzehnte hinweg aufgebaut, erweitert und verfeinert haben. Es sind mehr als 35 Jahre, die wir heute würdigen und feiern. Die autonomen österreichischen Frauenhäuser bieten nicht nur unmittelbaren konkreten Schutz, Beratung, Begleitung und medizinische Versorgung für von Gewalt bedrohten Frauen und sich in Not befindlichen Frauen und Kindern, sondern der Verein hat auch das Ziel, lösungsorientiert und systemisch die Situation konkret zu verbessern. Im Zuge des Projekts Stopp! Stadtteile ohne Partnergewalt zum Beispiel leistet er Stadtteilarbeit, um gewaltfreie Nachbarschaften zu ermöglichen. Insbesondere werden hier Jugendliche angesprochen und unterstützt. Der Verein betreibt zudem seit Jahren unermüdlich Öffentlichkeitsarbeit und politische Überzeugungsarbeit, um die öffentliche Wahrnehmung für dieses gesellschaftlich unbequeme Thema zu schärfen, das gesellschaftliche Engagement zu verbessern und Politikerinnen und Politikern für Maßnahmen für eine verbesserte Situation zu gewinnen. Mit Ausdauer und langfristiger Klugheit haben über Jahrzehnte hinweg professionelle Teams, zurzeit sind es ca. 50 Mitarbeiterinnen und 20 Mitarbeiterinnen, aber auch zusätzlich viele Ehrenamtliche, Ansätze entwickelt, die existenziellen Bedürfnisse zu erfüllen, vor allem Sicherheit und Geborgenheit zu geben und dabei sehr niederschwellig zu sein. Es ist vergleichsweise leicht, über die Schwelle eines österreichischen Frauenhauses zu gehen, und doch ist es ein längerer Weg, um mit Selbstbewusstsein und Zuversicht aus dem Frauenhaus zu gehen. Frauen, Buben und Mädchen, die hier Schutz und Möglichkeiten für ein neues, selbstbestimmtes Leben gefunden haben. Und wie kann und könnte es weitergehen? Noch mehr Frauenhäuser, effektivere Maßnahmen gegen Gewalt, mehr Selbstbewusstsein und Ermächtigung von Frauen? Oder ist es auch etwas anderes? Bei der Gewalt an Frauen sind die Männer das Problem und nicht die Frauen. Das sage ich offen, ohne in eine Männerfeindlichkeit hier abzugleiten. Wir brauchen neue Männerbilder, ein neues Verständnis von Männlichkeit, was Männlichkeit bedeutet. Bilder von Männern, die ihre Gefühle wahrnehmen können und mit ihnen konstruktiv umgehen. Bilder von Männern, die bei Konflikten das Gespräch suchen und sich nicht Gewalt hingeben. Von denen gibt es viele. Beispielhaft sei die Generation junger Väter genannt. Doch werden sie nicht genug wahrgenommen. In den Medien zu wenig. Im Gegenteil. Andrew Tate, strafrechtlich verfolgt wegen Missbrauch von Minderjährigen, Prostitution und Gewalt, der seinen Frauenhass in die Welt schreit, ist eine internationale Berühmtheit, insbesondere auf der Internetplattform TikTok. Er gehört weltweit zu den auf Google am häufigsten gesuchten Personen. Um diesen Trends entgegenzuwirken, brauchen wir nicht nur Regulierung und Strafverfolgung, sondern auch überzeugende, gewaltfreie, positive Männerbilder. Wir brauchen aber auch ein anderes Selbstverständnis bei Frauen. Frauen, die mit Selbstbewusstsein Führungspositionen anstreben, in zukunftsprägende Bereiche wie der Digitalisierung aktiv sind und dort eine neue Kultur prägen. Frauenförderungsmaßnahmen haben eben nur teilweise etwas bewirkt. Wenn wir im gleichen Schritttempo weitergehen, werden wir vielleicht erst in 300 Jahren über eine vollständige Gleichberechtigung zwischen Männern und Frauen reden können. Wir brauchen einen kulturellen Wandel in unserer Gesellschaft, bei dem das Ergebnis auch ein anderes Männer- und Frauenbild ist. Wir brauchen ein anderes Bild von unserer Gesellschaft, ein neues Wir. Und dafür ist jetzt der richtige Zeitpunkt. Denn wir befinden uns in einem tiefgreifenden Veränderungsprozess, der fast alle Lebensbereiche betrifft und gleichzeitig stattfindet. Zum Beispiel Klimawandel, Globalisierung, Migration, Digitalisierung, mangelnde Chancengleichheit, Schere zwischen Arm und Reich, Verlust an sozialer Sicherheiten, Krieg in der Ukraine und Gaza, um nur Beispiele zu nennen. Spätestens seit dem Krieg in der Ukraine ist zudem klar geworden, dass autoritäre Systeme gegen demokratische kämpfen, befeuert von den Tech-Konzernen. Die Essenz unserer Gesellschaft, die Menschenrechte, drohen dabei verloren zu gehen. Für diese Dimension des Veränderungsprozesses brauchen wir Zukunftsbilder, die attraktiver sind als die Abwehr, die immer mit Veränderungen einhergehen. Doch an diesen Visionen fehlt es. An diesen Visionen fehlt es nicht nur für unsere Demokratie, sondern auch für die Veränderungsprozesse, für die Jugend, für Männer und Frauen. Visionen für eine Gesellschaft, die den Dialog sucht und Wege aus Gewalt zeigt, Alternativen zu Gewalt bietet. Für einen solchen Weg ist der Verein der autonomen österreichischen Frauenhäuser ein Leuchtturm. So ist die Verleihung des Bruno Kreisky Menschenrechtspreises 2024 nicht nur eine Würdigung und Ermutigung für all diejenigen, die die Arbeit des Vereins tragen, sondern er schärft auch das öffentliche und politische Bewusstsein über die Situation von gewaltbetroffenen Frauen und Kindern in Österreich und macht Mut für die Gestaltung einer gemeinsamen Zukunft, in der Männer und Frauen in Chancengleichheit leben und sich gewaltfrei begegnen, in der eine Kultur der Menschenrechte gelebt wird. Das ist Hoffnung, die Realität werden kann. Ich beglückwünsche die Vertreterin des der autonomen österreichischen Frauenhäuser, aber natürlich in erster Linie die Frauenhäuser selbst, die Vertreterin Frau Maja Markanović-Riedl und Alice Swinton. Herzlichen Glückwunsch.
Liebe Frau Winkler, herzlichen Dank für die rührende, wie schöne Rede. Liebe Jury, liebes Publikum, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Ich habe mir heute eigentlich fest vorgenommen, mit etwas Positivem zu beginnen. Das Thema ist schon schwierig genug und es gibt heute eigentlich viel zu feiern, wie wir schon von den Vorrednerinnen gehört haben. Nur manchmal holt uns halt einfach die Realität ein. Als ich heute Vormittag wieder die Nachrichten gecheckt habe, musste ich wieder feststellen, dass eine Frau von einem Mann getötet worden ist. Es ist der 22. Femizid des heurigen Jahres. Es ist schon wieder in den eigenen vier Wänden passiert und es ist schon wieder eine Frau über 60. Und ich möchte deshalb an dieser Stelle allen Betroffenen und Angehörigen mein tiefes Beileid aussprechen. Ich darf hier in Vertretung aller Mitarbeiterinnen, aller Frauenhäuser und insbesondere aller gewaltbetroffenen Frauen zu Ihnen sprechen. Und ich darf hier als Geschäftsführung der autonomen österreichischen Frauenhäuser die Gelegenheit nutzen, Ihnen allen Danke zu sagen. Danke für die Anerkennung der langjährigen Arbeit vieler Mitarbeiterinnen der autonomen österreichischen Frauenhäuser. Unsere Aufgabe ist es, tagtäglich für ein gewaltfreies Leben für alle Kinder und Frauen, die in Österreich leben, zu kämpfen. Eine edle Aufgabe. Hier sind wir uns einig. Stellen wir uns diese edle Aufgabe jedoch mal ganz kurz, ganz konkret vor. Jede Stunde, jeden Tag, jede Woche, 24/7, das ganze Jahr sitzt eine Mitarbeiterin bei uns im Büro am Bacherplatz und nimmt Anrufe entgegen. Frauen, die verunsichert anrufen und fragen, ob sie überhaupt von Gewalt sprechen können, wenn sie doch keine sichtbaren Verletzungen am Körper tragen. Frauen, die weinend anrufen und fragen, was mit ihnen und ihren Kindern passiert, wenn sie die Polizei rufen. Frauen, die erleichtert anrufen und uns erzählen, dass sie endlich in Sicherheit sind, dass sie endlich in einem Frauenhaus sind. Frauen, die unglaublich mutig sind und denen dieser Preis noch viel mehr gebührt. Ja, es ist eine edle Aufgabe, aber es wäre sie nicht noch edler, wenn wir uns nicht alle dieser Aufgabe stellen müssten. Stellen wir uns mal ganz naiv eine Welt vor, in der es keine Morde an Frauen mehr gibt. Eine Welt, in der Frauen nicht gedemütigt, vergewaltigt, geschlagen werden. Eine Welt, in der Frauen einfach nur dieselben Rechte haben wie Männer. Wir als autonome österreichische Frauenhäuser wollen uns das nicht nur vorstellen. Wir kämpfen dafür, dieser Realität jeden Tag näher zu kommen. Dafür brauchen wir aber auch Sie, geschätztes Publikum, geschätzte Jury, meine Damen und Herren. Lassen Sie uns über dieses unbequeme Thema sprechen. Hören wir hin statt weg. Hören wir hin, wenn ein Kollege sexistische Witze über Frauen macht. Hören wir hin, wenn ein Mann in der U-Bahn seine Frau anschreit. Hören wir hin, wenn eine Freundin erzählt, dass ihr Partner immer wissen will, wo sie sich wann und mit wem trifft. Denn genau hier beginnt Gewalt. Aber hier beginnt auch Gewaltprävention. Und das ist die gute Nachricht. Denn Gewaltprävention bedeutet für uns alle, dem Kollegen zu sagen, dass seine Witze unangemessen sind, auch wenn es unangenehm ist. In der U-Bahn die Frau anzusprechen und zu fragen, ob sie Unterstützung braucht, auch wenn es unangenehm ist. Der Freundin die Nummer der Frauenhelpline zuzuschicken und sie zu ermutigen, mit ihr sogar vielleicht gemeinsam dort anzurufen. Das sind unangenehme Aufgaben, da sind wir uns auch einig. Aber es sind, wie vorher erwähnt, auch edle Aufgaben. Aus einer kleinen Tat wird eine so wichtige Geste dem Täter gegenüber signalisiert, denn er weiß, Gewalt ist nie okay. Aber auch seinem Opfer zeigen wir, Gewalt ist nie okay. Gewalt gegen Frauen ist kein individuelles Problem, sondern eine gesamtgesellschaftliche und strukturelle Realität. Der Kampf gegen Gewalt an Frauen kann und darf nicht allein von uns Frauen geführt werden. Die Istanbul-Konvention, das wichtigste internationale Rechtsinstrument zur Verhütung und Bekämpfung geschlechterspezifischer Gewalt in Europa, betont die Bedeutung der rechtlichen und faktischen Gleichstellung der Geschlechter. Diese Gleichstellung darf sich nicht nur in Gesetzen und Verordnungen widerspiegeln. Da machen wir es uns zu einfach. Wir müssen sie auch in unser tägliches Leben tragen, in unsere Häuser, unsere Nachbarschaft, unsere Bezirke, unsere Grätzeln. Die Konvention betont auch die Wichtigkeit der Prävention. Wir brauchen eine tiefgreifende Veränderung im Bewusstsein und im Verhalten der Allgemeinbevölkerung, also von uns allen. Geschlechterstereotype müssen überwunden. Die Sensibilisierung der Gesellschaft muss gefördert werden. Wir brauchen somit auch die Politik als starke Verbündete. Wir sind sehr dankbar für die Unterstützung, die wir bisher erhalten haben. Wir brauchen aber weiterhin entschlossene Maßnahmen von der Bundesebene bis zur Bezirksebene, auch bei zukünftigen Regierungen, wie auch immer sie aussehen mögen. Nur wenn wir Gewalt an Frauen und Mädchen als gesamtgesellschaftliches Problem verstehen, nur dann können wir auch effektive Maßnahmen setzen, um diese geschlechterspezifische Gewalt an Frauen dauerhaft zu verhindern. Für diese edle Aufgabe, Sie erinnern sich, brauchen wir Mut. Lassen Sie uns gemeinsam mutig sein. Herzlichen Dank.
The final words go to Professor Oliver Radkolb, the Executive Officer of the Bruno Kreisky Foundation for Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm a remote officer of the Austrian Army, not in charge anymore. Thank you so much for these magnificent speeches. It's impossible, I think, to find a correct version at the end of what we heard here. I will point out three issues which are important in order to be able to keep the foundation and the Bruno Kreisky Prize for Human Rights alive. The most important issue when it comes to prize money are the founders. And we are very privileged that we still have within the foundation board a large number of the original founders of the foundation in 1976. I'm very happy that the mayor of Vienna, the city of Vienna, is an important founding institution, sent a representative, the Abgeordnete zum Land- und Gemeinderat Kurt Stürzenbecher, and a warm welcome to you. And Mayor Ludwig is also very close to the Bruno Kreisky archives as
chairman of the board, and the city of Vienna is an important figure. But we also have, and this I think reminds us to the fact of Austrian social partnership. When Bruno Kreisky was Chancellor of Austria, the Social Democrats had the absolute majority, but social partnership was booming like never in history before, neither afterwards. And this is the reason why, for example, the League of Industrialists is also still a partner and helping us, like banks, BAWAG, BSK, or Bank Austria, or the Chamber of Labor and the trade unions. And I would like to thank all these institutions to support us to be able to not only organize these prize ceremony, but also give some money to the prize winners. The second issue I would like to focus on, and you already realized it when we heard the speeches by and on Evgenia and Vladimir Kara-Murza, that we have an excellent group of experts. Yeah? For example, in the 1970s, this group of experts with other people were able to pinpoint to give the prize to Nelson Mandela, who was still in prison in South Africa. By the way, it was a heated debate within the committee of experts whether to give him the prize or not, because some still considered him a criminal, like we have the problem today. But here, interestingly enough, Bruno Kreisky, more or less with a hidden hand chancellery, intervened, and this is the reason why Nelson Mandela received this prize. And I would like really to use this opportunity to thank our recent group of experts like Professor Manfred Nowak, and you already heard a large number of distinguished members of our group here, like Beate Winkler. And therefore, I also would like to briefly draw your attention to a very important long-time member of the Committee of Experts, the former Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, Karl Schwarzenberg, who unfortunately passed away in November 2023. And he very well fits to what we have heard about Russia, because he had a nickname. He had several nicknames. I only will present one. In German, it's Fürst Courage, Prince Courage, since he was very important as the president of the Helsinki Federation and during the Cold War. And I think it's also a good time to remember his work, and we really miss him because he was an outstanding active member within our group of experts. To close, I would like also on behalf of the Bruno Kreisky Foundation on Human Rights to congratulate the award winners, both the international one and the national ones. They all fit to the political interests of Bruno Kreisky, as we have heard from Sabine Kroissenbrunner. He was really interested in women's rights, not the Social Democratic Party, to put it bluntly, in the late 1970s and 1980s. And this was the reason why he himself appointed 4 secretaries of state to the Austrian Chancellery. And I think sometimes it's good when the Social Democrats plus the trade unions also have a critical view in their own history with regard to women's rights. And Kreisky was really a pioneer here. The other issue, and I was very happy that I could look at a very old brochure which Margit Schmidt and I have put together when we together opened the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue in 1992, because I would like to find something which you already mentioned, that Kreisky permanently intervened in favor of Soviet personalities, Russian personalities, again, and tried to support them against the communist regime. He did, by the way, the same with regard to Václav Havel, for example, in the then Czechoslovakia. And he was also very outspoken, for example, during the final signing ceremony of the Helsinki agreements. And I found, and this I will present to Evgenia and Vladimir Kara-Murza, in this brochure, which I completely forgot since it's quite a long time, an interesting letter which was written by Andrei Sakharov, who wrote to Kreisky in 1977 to continue to support his efforts, which then also were very important to establish Memorial. And therefore I would like to present you this brochure and this page. And you find the original letter in the Bruno Kreisky archives. And I think it's a wonderful bridge from the really outstanding work you are doing, assisted in a courageous way by Sir William and other people. And it leads me back to the 1970s, which also I think is good, because when we look then to 1989 and 1990 and 91, that there is still hope, because in 1977, no one believed that ever the Cold War would end or the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain will fall. And I think that's an important topic. As you already have heard, I think Bruno Kreisky is an important also personality because of his experiences as a political prisoner. He was imprisoned by the authoritarian Schuschnigg dictatorship for 15 months in 1935, and later on by the National Socialists for another 5 months in 1938, was excluded from the University of Vienna, and also tortured by the Gestapo in 1938 before he could flee Austria, then Nazi Germany, and went to Sweden. I think this is very important to understand that Kreisky's experiences really had determined and shaped his political life. Today we had lunch at the British Embassy, invited by the British ambassador, and it was very interesting when Vladimir Kara-Murza explained how he could survive prison, yeah? The importance of books. Yeah? Kreisky read from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening. Yeah, there's a nice book here done by Ulrike Felber and the Kreisky Archives, which show the prison diary of Bruno Kreisky. By the way, this was for Kreisky the real university. It was not the law school of the University of Vienna, because at that time it was a rather weak law school. He really learned in prison. And also what you have mentioned today, the importance of having letters, yeah? Letters of support, and I'm really so happy that you have been able also to receive the message that the Bruno Kreisky Foundation for Human Rights has presented the prize for you. In the case of Bruno Kreisky, and this is my last word, the most important postcard he got in prison was by Alan Sainsbury. Yeah, still many of you know the Sainsbury shops in Great Britain. But when he saw this card, yeah, a young student, revolutionary socialist in prison, yeah, he really was, he received more or less a a real power engine to really be able to stand prison for such a long time as a young man. Again, thank you so much for this evening. We had, I think, many prize ceremonies, but this evening was a very, very special evening, and we have so many bridges between the present, the future, and the past. And when you look to the history of Bruno Kreisky, when he was a social democrat in prison in 1935, 36, 37, no one thought that he ever would play a political role, because in the prison also were the National Socialists who said, we are the future, and on the other hand, the communists, we are this future. But history has shown that there is hope, and I'm convinced that with personalities like you, Vladimir, Kara-Murza, like you, Evgenia, Kara-Murza, and like you, Sir William, the future can change our developments and hopefully the world. Thank you so much.